welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our fourth webinar in the EnSafe Client Education Series. My name is Rich Heinzenberger. I'm a project manager here at EnSafe. And today's webinar is on the top 10 compliance issues facing the chemical industry. And it's being presented by Dee Dee Curry. Dee Dee works out of the EnSafe office in Dallas, Texas. She is a senior compliance specialist with EnSafe. So once again, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I will turn it over to Dee Dee. Take it away, Dee Dee.
Okay, as Rich said, our topic today is the top 10 environmental non-compliance findings. And just a little bit about me. I don't have my camera on, so I'll just use my picture here, and you can look at a little bit of my experience. I've been working in the industry for about 38 years. Started out in aerospace, was there for about 30 years, and then have been with EnSafe for about 8 years doing consulting work. When I was in the aerospace industry, as you can see, I moved around a little bit and did different things, but by far I have liked the EHS world the best. So when EnSafe does audits, we tend to see a lot of the same common findings. And we do audits for a variety of reasons. Typically, it's part of a client's continuous improvement program or their EHS management system. They want us to come in and do an audit just to make sure that they're in compliance and that there's not a huge risk out there for their company. Another reason that we do audits is a regulatory agency or maybe a corporate audit finds a pretty significant issue at one facility, and that client maybe has 20 sites or 40 sites, and they want us to come in and visit all those other sites to make sure that they don't have the same risk or the same issue at all their other sites. It's better for you to find it internally than EPA or your state agency to start poking around at your other sites, and then you've got a big mess on your hands. And then lastly, another common reason we do audits is that a company will buy another company, and they want us to come in and assess the compliance risk at their new sites. So they'll bring us in, and we'll go out and audit a bunch of facilities, and again just look for risk to the company. So when we go out and do these audits, we can see the challenges that that industry is faced with, that our clients are faced with. And this slide kind of depicts the common challenges that we see across the board. I mean, our world is pretty complicated. The EHS world is very complicated. There's a lot of requirements. They can vary from state to state. There can also be, federal requirements that apply, local requirements, county, district, and there's a wide variety of regulations that may apply. The next challenge we see is, you as the regulated community, you have to figure out, do you need a permit? Do you need a registration? Is this something, is this process exempt, or is it on a de minimis list? So you've got to really, dig through the regulations and figure out what applies and what doesn't apply. And then the next, just kind of segue to the next challenge is the burden is on your sites and your EHS professionals to figure out, what applies and if you are in compliance. And then, to make matters even more challenging, the regulatory agencies, they don't want you to get bored. They like to change things up. New challenges come up, new regulations come in place. So you've got to have some way to keep up with all those changes. And then to me, one of the most critical things is, as an EHS professional, is for you to be very in tune with site processes, the equipment you have, the materials that you're using, what kind of things are in storage, is it in a tank, or is it in a equipment reservoir? And then also, what kind of releases do you have to the environment, either to the air, water, stormwater, through waste or recycling? So, it's a big task ahead of you. So what we're going to cover today, and again, these are the top 10 findings that we see on our typical environmental compliance audits. We've got 3 topics on air, and we'll go into more detail on each one of these. 3 topics on waste, a topic on stormwater, a topic, kind of a combined topic with Tier 2 and SPCC, and this is specific to looking at chemicals and equipment. That's something that people often miss. environmental training, and then finally, this is kind of a crossover with into the safety and health world and the Department of Homeland Security world. There are 3 programs: Process Safety Management Standard, Risk Management Program, and Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard that have a lot of overlap. And we're starting to see a kind of a common thread where sites don't realize they're even subject to these rules, and they're pretty robust rules. And if you if you're out of compliance, it can be quite serious. So what we're going to do for each of those 10 topics is we're going to talk about some kind of general regulatory requirements. We'll give examples of what we see, and then we'll give some examples of some non-compliances, but the typical things that we see. So just really curious to see how many of our clients do bring in a third party to conduct audits.
Yeah, so the question is, has your site ever had a third party audit? And the majority of the respondents are selecting yes.
That's great.
That they have had a third party audit. There's a couple of you who have not had an audit, and some are unsure if they've had an audit. But the overwhelming majority is yes, they've had an audit.
So the first topic we're going to cover is air emissions, and in particular the permitting of air emission sources. So again, the burden is going to be on your site and your EHS professionals to identify processes and equipment that either generate air pollution or control air pollution. So, something that somebody might miss is something that generates dust and a fuel combustion source. And you've got a list of things here: boilers, furnaces, curing ovens, stationary engines, in particular, things that are powered by gasoline or diesel. And then any kind of solvent containing materials or processes: paints, degreasers, fiberglass layup. And then also, and of interest, and from a permitting standpoint, is what kind of air pollution control devices do you have? Because typically that gets worked into your permit application, and it's part of your air emission calculations. So you've got some kind of fabric filter or dust collectors, or some kind of filter bank and a spray booth, that sort of thing. So you have to kind of be cognizant not only of the source of air pollution, but any kind of device that might be used to control it. Next, as we mentioned earlier, you've got to go through and dissect the regulations. Some programs have been delegated to states. There's also federal programs that may apply. I know, like in California, there's air quality management districts. So could be a wide variety of rules that you have to dissect and digest. And while looking for things that apply, you should also look for exemptions and exceptions, because that might mean, you don't have to permit something. It's on a de minimis list, or it's got some kind of exemption to where you do not have to permit it. So if you do have to permit something and it's not exempt, then you have to calculate what's called the potential to emit. So that means that if your shop, your factory, your lab is at full production, if you can, whatever your maximum capacity is, you would have to calculate the potential that you have that you could emit, and then compare that against any kind of permit limit or regulatory threshold. So if it's not exempt and you do exceed any kind of permitting limit, then you would have to apply for air permit or a registration, in compliance with your local regs or federal regs. So we touched on a little bit of this in the last slide, but some other examples of air emission sources would be things like surface coating, liquid storage tanks, engines, generators, boilers. Even metal grinding could have particulate emissions. Abrasive blasting could have particulate emissions. Two-part resin systems, reactor gas, exhaust gases, and then something, again, as mentioned before, you may not think about: sources of dust. I mean, some permits even require you to control dust on roadways. So you've got to really be cognizant of activities at your site, as I said earlier, the materials, the equipment, the processes to know what might be subject to air permitting. So some common findings that we see, installation of a air emission source without a permit or without a construction permit. So, I mean, this is very, very common. Somebody dreams up a project to do. Hey, we need a piece of equipment. We need a new oven, or we need a new paint booth. And, you just go order it, get it installed, and start using it, and, without getting a construction permit. The other thing is maybe you've gotten a construction permit and you're ready to operate your new toy, but you don't have an operating permit. So you're even though you got your construction permit, you're operating without your operating permit. And then something that is very, very common is a site gets a permit or an authorization. That's great. Everything was wonderful at the time they got the permit, but now it's 3 years later, business is booming, and we've had to add more equipment and materials, and we've got more throughput and more hours of operation. And maybe we had a control device that we altered, or we found a cheaper filter, and now we're not using the same filter that we used in our permit application, and we're out of compliance. So these 3 bullets are, I see, very, very common, and it really has to do with kind of a management of change process. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next topic, which is record keeping for air emissions. Typically, if you have some kind of permit or registration, you are going to have to keep records to demonstrate compliance with the permit limits. And depending on the type of permit you have, the record keeping requirements can be enforceable. In other words, if you're not keeping them, you can get a notice of violation. The record keeping frequency can be a variety of time frames, either continuous monitoring once per shift, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. It just depends on what your permit says.
And the question is, does your site have a management of change process? Looks like the vast majority are responding with yes, there is a management of change process. I would say that's a positive sign for sure.
Yes, very good. I wanted to mention management of change and how important it is in our world. These 3 findings are a direct result of not having a robust management of change process. And this will come up over and over throughout this presentation, talking about record keeping. So these are just some examples of the type of record keeping that might be required. For a bag house or a dust collector, you might have to read the pressure drop once a day or once a shift. Emergency generators, hours of operation, that could be annual. Even something like welding, there's a requirement in Texas, a permit by rule, that you have to be below a certain amount of lead in the weld wire. So at least once a year, you should make sure that you've got documentation to show that. Concrete batch plants, tons produced on a monthly basis. Asphalt plant, hours of operation. Abrasive blasting booths, tons of abrasive. Paint booths have a whole lot of record keeping. Could be the type of paint or coating you're using, the VOC content, the HAP content, hazardous air pollutant, and the amount used. And this could be as often as once per shift. And then another example would be visible emissions from a boiler when you're firing on diesel. So typical findings that we see, records are missing or incomplete. And then a very common one is a contractor is performing some kind of service for you, but does not provide the required records. The most common one I see on this is refrigerant devices that contain over 50 pounds of refrigerant, of an ozone depleting substance in particular. There is a whole lot of record keeping if there is a leak. And typically the service contractor will just repair the leak, replace the refrigerant, and then they won't give you any records. And it's, I know they're professionals and that's their business, but they do owe you the records for that because it is quite extensive record keeping. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, maybe a contractor comes in to work on your scrubber or your bag house, and they change the filter media. They they want to be a hero. They find something much cheaper, but it's not compliant. It does not match what was in your permit application. And then finally, the records are not maintained for the required period of time, and that could be as much as 5 years. So it's it's sometimes difficult to manage that much paperwork and that much documentation. Okay, the next topic is there's a series of federal air regulations that could apply to your site. So just to further complicate things, it's not just your local and state requirements. There could be even federal requirements that you're subject to. So some typical ones that we see are new source performance standards, national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, and then protection of stratospheric ozone. That's hard to say. And some of these may apply depending on if you're an area source or a major source. So just a quick and dirty definition of major source. That would be 10 tons per year of a single HAP, or 25 tons per year of a combined HAP, and by HAP I mean hazardous air pollutant, or 100 tons per year of any air pollutant. But let me caveat that by saying, if you're in a non-attainment area for any of the criteria pollutants such as ozone, those levels, it's particularly that 100 ton per year, that will be much lower. So you would have to check your attainment status for whatever area you're in to see what your local threshold would be. And then here is a reference that we found through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They've got some really good flow charts to help you navigate these federal rules to see if they're applicable. And these are just some examples. I mean, this is just a snapshot. These lists of these federal rules are very exhaustive. So these are just some typical examples we see in the industries that we go out and audit. I won't read every one of these, but you can see that it kind of runs the gamut, and it's typically very specific type industries or processes. So examples that we see in this world, I think it's just lack of awareness of these federal rules, and many of these require an initial notification. They require some kind of monitoring, lots of record keeping, and sometimes they even have to have an annual report. Or if there's a non-compliance, you've got to submit a non-compliance report. And then again, I'm going to harp on this last one, not maintaining records for equipment that contain over 50 pounds of an ozone depleting substance. Since that's so common, I'm going to repeat that one a few times. Okay, we're going to shift gears to waste, the waste program. I know I'm going pretty fast, but got a lot of material to cover. So here is our regulatory citation. This is a federal reg. Again, your states may have their regulations also. Doing a waste characterization is applicable to all categories of hazardous waste generators. And to me, doing these waste characterizations is the cornerstone of a waste program. Everything else just kind of emanates from your waste characterization. They must be made at the point of generation, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And the regulators let you use process knowledge to do the characterizations, or you can use analyticals, which I much prefer analyticals, and I'm gonna show you why a little bit later. So you've got to determine a couple of things. Do you have a listed waste? There are 4 different lists. The F-listed waste are like non-specific sources. That would be something like a spent solvent. A K-listed waste is a specific source, and that would be something like pesticide manufacturing or ink formation. They're very, very specific. The P and U lists are off-spec commercial chemical products. So the P list is the acutely hazardous, and the U list is just hazardous. And then also a waste might be hazardous due to a characteristic. It could either be flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. And again, sometimes you can use the SDSs for this, and sometimes you really need analytical. what I've seen, even when I was industry, this came up a lot of times, and since I've been a consultant, people don't think about certain waste streams, the potential for them to be hazardous. And these are just some examples that I've seen over the years. Your plant trash, you don't think about that, but plant trash often contains regulated and industrial waste. And I'm talking about things like solvent rags, oily rags, paint waste, even pumps and hoses that can be contaminated with chemical waste and aerosol cans. So believe it or not, we do dumpster dive studies for companies. And, I've seen all kinds of waste streams in plant trash that definitely should not have been in there. Floor sweepings, when I worked in the aerospace industry, our floor sweepings were very high in lead, cadmium, and chromium. And, people don't think about that. You're just doing housekeeping. It's just dirt and crud, and I'm just going to put it in the trash. And when you do analytical, you'll be surprised at what can be in your floor sweepings. Filters and filter media, they can also contain regulated metals and solvents, and they could be a listed waste. An example of that is if you are treating rinse water from a metal finishing operation by filtering it, that filter could contain sludge from the treatment of wastewater from metal finishing, which would be an F-listed waste. So you could create a hazardous waste and not even realize it. Grinding sludges also often contain regulated metals. Abrasive blast media also can contain metals. Rinse waters and wastewaters can contain metals and solvents. And then again, spill cleanup, you may have a listed waste and not even realize it. The example I use here is you've got virgin toluene that leaks out of a tank. It contaminates the soil. If you were to dispose of that virgin toluene, it would be a U-listed waste. So once it gets mixed with that contaminated soil, then all of that becomes a U-listed waste. So you've got a listed waste, a hazardous waste, and you may not even realize it. So common findings that we see, people often rely on SDSs exclusively to make their waste characterizations. So the problem with that is, let's say you've got a cleaner, you're using Simple Green in your mop water. Simple Green, non-hazardous. So the mop water must be non-hazardous. But if you did some analytical, you would account for what that mop water is picking up, as you mop your shop floor. It could, it could contain regulated metals. But if you only use your SDS, you would not pick up the regulated metals. If you rely solely on process knowledge to make waste characterizations, let's say this is an example I worked with a client. They process metal parts in a furnace, and they pack chromium-containing powder around the parts. And the filters from the furnace, they're just assuming based on process knowledge that they just contain dirt and debris. But when we did the analysis, they were very high in chromium, high enough to make them a hazardous waste. So we would have missed that if we only relied on process knowledge. And then the other thing you risk, if you don't do an analytical, there's a term in the waste world called underlying hazardous constituents. So let's say, for instance, you test something for Ricker metals, and it's only got 3 parts per million chrome, so it's not over the 5 part per million limit. You still need to inform the disposal company of any kind of underlying hazardous constituents that they need to know about in order to treat it properly from a disposal standpoint. So if you only use SDSs and process knowledge, you're likely going to miss these underlying hazardous constituents. And the treatment facility runs the risk of not treating them properly.
The question is, how confident are you that your facility has identified all waste streams and completed all waste characterizations? And the choices are very confident, somewhat confident, or not confident at all. And it looks like sort of a mixed bag of responses here. Got some are very confident that they've captured all their waste streams and all waste characterizations. Most are filling out the somewhat confident answer, and a couple of you are not confident at all. I would say that's to be expected.
So another waste topic is determining your generator status. And again, if you haven't done your waste characterizations, it will be virtually impossible to determine your hazardous waste generator status. So earlier I mentioned that the generator status is based on the amount of hazardous waste you generate each month, not the amount that is shipped each month. So it's very important to keep records, especially if you're a small quantity or a very small quantity generator. It's very important to keep those records as to how much you're generating each month. So these are the three categories. Not too long ago, EPA came out with some new rules and some new terminology. The new term is very small quantity generator. This was formerly the C-SQUIG, conditionally exempt small quantity generator. So these are a lot of numbers, but I think the key numbers to remember are, for large quantity generator, you can do pretty much whatever, however much you need to do as far as generating. If you're greater than 2,200 pounds per month, you're going to be a large quantity generator. The next two categories are the ones that you really need to pay attention to. So small quantity generator would be just normal hazardous waste, not acute hazardous waste, would be greater than 220 pounds per month, but less than 2,200. And if you have one of those acutely hazardous waste, like that off-spec P listed waste, you've got to be below 2.2 pounds per month, which is just almost nothing. And then very small quantity, you've got to be below 220 pounds per month on hazardous waste, and the same amount for acutely hazardous. And just for a frame of reference, if you have a 55-gallon drum of waste, whatever it is, I don't know what it is, but let's say it's 1/2 full, it could weigh as much as 200 to 300 pounds. So if you're trying to be a very small quantity generator, you're already over your 220 pounds per month with just a 1/2 drum of waste. So common compliance findings, as I mentioned, if you don't have waste characterizations, it's going to be almost impossible to determine your generator status. If you're not tracking the amount of hazardous waste generated each month, you can't determine your generator status. I know these sound obvious, but we see this a lot. And then another thing that people try to do to game the system, you can't base your generator status on the amount that you ship each month. It has to be the amount that you generate. And an example of that is, let's say 1 month, you're a very small quantity generator. You generate 400 pounds in that month, but you ship that over several months to stay under the next level of generator status. That's not the way it works. It's the amount that's generated in a month, not the amount that's shipped in a month. And then another common thing we see, say for instance, you register your company as either a very small quantity or small quantity generator. You're rocking along, everything's fine, and then business starts booming, and then you bumped up to that large quantity generator status, and you don't realize it, and you haven't put all the programs in place. And we have clients that EPA has come in, and without ever setting foot on a site, they can look at the e-manifests. They look at your generator status, and you're shipping 20,000 pounds every few months of hazardous waste, but yet you're not registered as a large quantity generator. You don't have all the programs in place, so they can come in with an enforcement action. It's kind of scary that they can do this, just sitting at their desk looking at electronic records. Okay, and then the last waste topic is exceeding the accumulation time limit. Again, for large quantity generators, you can store waste for no more than 90 days. You have to mark your containers and tanks with the accumulation start date. You have to do weekly inspections. And if you get in a bind, you can apply for an extension. If you can't meet the 90-day limits, you can apply for an extension. For small quantity generator, everything is the same as above, except you've got 180 days for on-site storage. And then for very small quantity generators, there is no time limit for accumulation. So one thing that we would highly recommend, you've got to be doing your weekly inspections anyway. You're checking your dates. I would recommend that you schedule your shipments more frequently than every 90 or 180 days, just to make sure you're covered and you don't, run up to a deadline. And then also when you're doing your inspections, use the oldest container date, among all your waste containers, and that, use that as your ticking clock for that 90-day or 180-day window. So what we see here is just that waste is accumulated for an indefinite amount of time. People stick it in the back 40, they stick it in a storeroom. We don't know what to do with it. It's old. We might, it still could be good, but, we don't really know what's going on, but we're just going to, we're going to put it in this room and let it sit there. So we have no idea how long it's been accumulated. Containers are not labeled with the contents or the accumulation start date. So, once you do decide to get rid of this waste, you could have to do a bunch of analytical, which is very expensive. So if you maintain your records better, label things properly, then more likely that you can easily get rid of the waste when it's time to get rid of it. And then the other thing that I also see a lot is people will set things aside. It really can't be used for its intended purpose, but they've got their fingers crossed, hope against hope, that we can maybe work this material back into a process. And a regulator would look at that and say that is waste. You've been storing waste for 2 years without a permit, and that's a violation. Okay, stormwater, shifting gears completely. Stormwater discharges from industrial activities may be covered either under a federal stormwater permit or a state permit. And it all is dictated by your site standard industrial code. So if you Google your state or the EPA's website and just say SIC code subject to stormwater permitting, you can look through that list and see if your code is on the list. And typically things like office buildings or strictly warehouses are not subject to stormwater permitting. But if you do any kind of manufacturing, almost without a doubt, you'll have to have a stormwater permit. So the permit requires the regulated community to minimize exposure of industrial activities to any form of precipitation. You've got to implement best management practices, and that could be things like housekeeping and inspections, erosion control, minimize the potential for leaks and spills, and do employee training. You may have to actually go out and physically get stormwater samples and send them out for analytical. And this program is not near as complicated as like the air program, but there are numerous records that have to be maintained in the stormwater program. So when you're trying to assess, once you've decided your SIC code is subject to stormwater permitting, these are the things that you should be looking for as potential pollutant sources. Chemical storage, outside. Finished product storage outside. This is all outside storage where it's exposed to precipitation. Equipment storage, material handling, loading and unloading, dumpsters, waste storage, and even equipment boneyards, because they could leak, they could have heavy metals on them, so that any of these could be potential pollutant sources. And common findings we see in the stormwater world is a site, again, is just not aware of the requirement. They just don't have a stormwater permit. They haven't ever investigated the need for one. But in some cases, a site has gotten a permit. They've gotten their stormwater pollution prevention plan. It's a nice binder, and it's sitting on a shelf, and they feel good that they're covered. But we find they're not collecting samples. They're not doing their inspections. They're not doing employee training, and they don't have any of the required records. And some of this analytical has to be submitted to your local agency. So it's not just you collect it and maintain the records. Some of this actually has to be submitted to your agencies. Something else that we see often is unauthorized discharges to stormwater system. By that I mean certain things are authorized to be discharged, like uncontaminated AC condensate. But we see things like air compressor blowdown, that has an oily residue, or boiler blowdown, different things that could have contaminants in them that are not authorized by your stormwater permit to be discharged to the environment. And then another common thing is that sites literally have contaminants exposed to stormwater. And this next slide is kind of an example of what we're talking about. We see a lot of, leaking equipment, stained soil. We see containers stored outside with residue all over them that's, exposed to stormwater. And this is not to say that you can't have containers stored outside. You can, but they have to be clean and kept closed. They can't have residue like the ones in the pictures that could just wash off into the stormwater system. Okay, shifting gears again to, this is kind of a combo topic, Tier 2 and SPCC, and specifically chemicals that are in equipment. Oftentimes people recognize, oh, I have stuff in drums, I have stuff in tanks, I know I have to report those, and that's, that's the end of it. They recognize that those are important and must be reported, but they don't recognize chemicals stored in equipment. And I'm going to give you some examples. And just a refresher on Tier 2, the threshold is 10,000 pounds for hazardous chemicals, and then 500 pounds or whatever the threshold planning quantity is, whichever is less. And this is for extremely hazardous substances. And then the same thing kind of, applies to SPCC also. There's a threshold of 1,320 gallons of petroleum substances on site that would pull you in. And again, people are very aware. I've got drums, totes, tanks. I know I've got to report those if it's greater than 55 gallons. But one thing that they often don't realize is you have to report petroleum substances in equipment reservoirs if those reservoirs are greater than 55 gallons. So this would be things like diesel powered pumps, generators, if you own your own transformer, and then even something like a CNC machine that contains machining coolant if it's greater than 55 gallons. So again, chemicals stored in equipment. Here are some things that are red flags that people just don't consider. If you have a very large HVAC system, you literally could have enough refrigerant in that system, over 10,000 pounds, that should be reported on your Tier 2 report. People often don't recognize lead acid batteries. If you have enough powered industrial vehicles, or if you've got a big battery backup for an uninterruptible power supply, you could have enough sulfuric acid, because that threshold is only 500 pounds, that would require Tier 2 reporting. Material used in fire suppression systems, you could have CO2, you could have halon. If it's over 10,000 pounds, you've got to report it. And then for SPCC, as we mentioned, the oil and coolant and other petroleum substances in equipment reservoirs, something you just might not recognize. Okay, common findings that we see. Your chemical inventory is not up to date, and it doesn't include, as we said, the chemical stored in equipment. One that came up very recently, you may not think about warehouses. Most people are thinking about their manufacturing facilities, but if you have a warehouse, maybe you have your main facility and then you've got an offsite warehouse, those also have to be evaluated for Tier 2 or SPCC applicability. You could easily have over 10,000 pounds that would pull you into Tier 2. And then things we see that are red flags when we're doing audits. Let's say you've got an SPCC plan, you've got your inventory of your petroleum substances, but then when we look at your Tier 2 report, those don't match, they don't jive. If you're subject to RMP planning, we look at your Tier 2 report and your RMP plan, and those chemical quantities don't match. And then again, we mentioned refrigerants. If you keep your inventory of refrigerants, we compare that against Tier 2 report, those don't match. Those are all red flags. Okay, shifting gears to training. As we all know, various environmental programs require employee training, and this is just a short list. There's probably way more than this, but typical training, hazardous waste, universal waste. Department of Transportation hazmat employee training for whoever signs your waste manifest, stormwater, pollution prevention training, SPCC training, wastewater treatment operator training. It's just, endless the amount of training that's required. What we see a lot here is just no training is provided. People aren't aware that there are all these training requirements and they're just not doing the training. Another real common thing is, we're working with the EHS professionals. They don't maintain the training records, like the HR department has them, or there's this online system that only certain people have access to, and they just flat do not have access to the records. And then another one that I've started seeing quite a bit lately is a site can produce training records, but not a list of employees who need the training. And by that, I mean, here's my example. You've got 10 maintenance employees who have received SPCC training, but there's 15 employees in the maintenance department. So you have those 15 who are really required to have it. I really don't, I really need the roster of who is required to have it. And then I can compare that against who has had it. So that's something I've been seeing a lot lately. Okay, our last topic, probably saved the most complicated and the most interesting for last. This is another one that all of a sudden I've been seeing quite a bit lately. There are 3 programs, and I mentioned this early on, that are very similar in nature. There's a lot of overlap. This is Process Safety Management Standard under OSHA, Risk Management Program under EPA, and then Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard under the Department of Homeland Security. And these 3 programs are all about risk reduction and protection of the local population. And then this CFATS also has a big security element to it. That they're also not just about risk, but also securing certain chemicals. And there are specific lists of chemicals for each one of these programs, but again, they overlap quite a bit. Here's some common chemicals that we see that are on all 3 lists. This is not, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. There are many more chemicals subject to these regulations. And they are, bottom line is, they're driven by a specific chemical, a specific quantity on site, and in many cases, a specific concentration. So you can see on nitric acid that the concentration is very important as far as determining applicability. So what we're finding, and again, I've just seen several repeats of this lately. We go in to do an audit. We look at their chemicals and think, oh my gosh, these are on these 3 lists, and one or 3 of these lists, and the sites are completely unaware of these programs. They don't even know anything about them. They don't know that they're subject to them. They're used to the kind of typical EHS programs, but these are not on their radar screen. The other unfortunate thing that I've seen happen is sites only become aware of these programs due to some kind of incident, a complaint, or an agency inspection. And a really interesting one that we had was a client had a neighbor that was complaining of odor. So the neighbor called the state regulatory agency, the environmental regulatory agency. They came out, and there was just this snowball of agency visits. And it turned out, they're subject to PSM. They're subject to all 3 of these programs, and they didn't even know it. And they wouldn't have become aware of it unless, they didn't have this neighbor complaint. And, unfortunately, sometimes there's an incident at a site, an explosion or a fire. When that happens, all kinds of agencies get involved, and then it comes out that you're subject to all these programs and you didn't even know it. And then lastly, kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier on Tier 2 and SPCC, if you have a warehouse facility that's off-site, that also needs to be assessed for these 3 programs, because it's, not so much PSM for a warehouse, but RMP and CFATs. If it's just in storage, it could be subject to at least those two programs. But a lot of people don't realize that warehouse storage could be pulled in. So that's a lot of information. I'm sorry I talked so fast, but if you have questions, here's my contact information. It was a lot to take in, and if you have any questions, just send me an email.
Great job, Dee Dee. Thank you to everybody who attended today, and that concludes our presentation.